before cops found Lisa's body. Officers would recall the horrific discovery, as many of the investigators had daughters who were around Lisa's age, so it really fucked them up.
Yeah, so they go out there the first time. Like, if you go out here and, Little River Canyon, you'll find the body right here near the power lines, and they go and look. Nothing at all. And it's a rough area. Nothing out of the ordinary. And then they get the second call, and they go out again, because, they're just like, well, shit, damn, maybe something's going on out here. So they look again, another group of cops, and nothing again.
Wasn't it a state trooper who actually found her body?
Yeah, and so State Trooper Tommy Brock, in an interview, said he had parked up the road from the rest of the cops. And then they looked around again. He walked down to meet them, looked all over the, picnic area and everything, off the banks best they can, and nothing again. So they're like, well, this is crank callers or something. And he's literally walking back to his car and just, kind of like it dawns on him to just try harder one more time to look off maybe the steepest part of it right there. He literally hangs on a branch, gripping a branch, and leans way out over the bank, and his flashlight catches her back, her clothing, and you can see there is indeed a body there. So, yeah, it's just a happenstance they found her at all.
A short time later, on October 4th, 1982, 26-year-old John Hancock and his fiancée, 23-year-old Janice Chapman, were walking down a street in Rome when a flashy car, a brown Dodge Charger, stopped at the curb. Hancock had been hanging out with his girlfriend at her mom's house. He had stopped by to borrow some nuts and bolts. Naively, when this total stranger, Judith Neelley, asked them if they wanted to party, she told them some story about being new in town and didn't really have any friends, and, hey, do you guys want to hang out? They were like, okay.
Hey, you think your girl might want to be raped, tortured, and murdered later?
Climbing into her car, they go on a drive into the nearby woods. Judith was on her CB radio talking to Night Rider. Now, eventually deciding to meet up at Morton Bend on the Coosa River, Alvin was waiting for them in his red Granada. Things were seemingly okay. Everybody was having a good time, and then Judith suggested they go find some moonshine. She tells John that he should ride in the car with Alvin. John would claim he didn't really feel right about the situation, but he climbs into the car with Alvin anyway. And they drive out to a rural part of Gordon County to find this moonshine. On the way, John's like, hey, can you pull over? And I got to take a leak. Alvin pulls the car over. Judith and Janice pull over behind them. He's trying to do his business. And that's when Judith pulled out a gun and shoots him in the back of the head with a .38.
What the hell?
Then Alvin and Judith leave him in this isolated area. But before pulling the trigger, Judith told him, don't worry about your girlfriend. I'm going to take care of her too.
See, they live on, they really thrive on this power and control. And once again, Judith pulls the gun out, blows his head off. So, she's a little monster.
Fortunately, Hancock would survive. And on a hunch, detectives had him listen to some recordings of this unknown suspect in the Milliken case, the person who had called repeatedly to report this dead body. Without hesitation, Hancock recognized the voice.
Yeah, it's that little crazy bitch who shot me.
Janice Chapman, in the meantime, was abducted by the Neelleys and taken to a motel room. Exactly like Lisa, Janice was repeatedly raped and tortured. After having their fun with Janice, she was shot, discarded on a creek bank in North Georgia.
She's used up like an object to be used and discarded when we're done with you. There's really no telling how many people they actually did this to, because they had it down to a science, if you will.
The case might have still gone unsolved if Alvin and Judith had not been arrested on a bad check wrap in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Alvin quickly hired a lawyer to represent Judith. Now, it was during this time, while in custody, she was recognized from photographs as the woman responsible for recent threats against the Youth Development Center in Rome.
Yeah, so all this time they're off doing all this other crazy shit. They still have this case of the shooting, the firebombing, threats to the Youth Development Center, and they don't, and she's dumb enough to call, which thank God, right?
It was all starting to catch up to Judith. Recordings of threatening phone calls were matched against police logs in the Milliken murder. And John Hancock quickly identified the Neelleys as his assailants. In custody, Alvin gave directions to a site in Chattanooga County where Janice Chapman's body was discovered. Alvin admitted both he and Judith had taken turns sexually abusing Janice.
Yeah, so I think now their narcissism's kicking in. They won't, make a big deal out of what they've done, you know? They're
Well,
just
initially,
forthcoming.
Judith was claiming that it was all Alvin, that he was the one with these sexual desires. But Alvin's like, whatever, she was into it as well. Like, we were both doing it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, how can you control someone so much that they go off independently? See, I mean, that's another element to this. It's not like he's got her by the wrist with his overbearing, insane personality there in the room with her, making her do these things. She's independent of him. She has her own damn vehicle. They spend quite a bit of time separate. She could get those kids and take off if she wanted to.
With confessions in progress, Alvin Neelley pled guilty to murder and aggravated assault in Georgia. He received 2 life sentences for his involvement in the John Hancock and Janice Chapman shootings. Only Judith would be tried in Alabama for Lisa Milliken's death. And before trial, she continued a family tradition by giving birth to her 3rd child in jail.
Somebody needs to tie this girl's tubes.
Jurors in the Milliken case convicted Judith, recommending a life sentence, but a judge exercised his option to ignore the recommendation, imposing a life sentence instead. A sentence of death.
Yeah, which was out of the ordinary a little bit, right?
Yes. At 18, Judith was the youngest woman in the U.S. to be handed down a death sentence.
And that judge just viewed her as a monster.
Yes.
So through testimony and evidence and what everyone else has said, again, the picture's being painted that she was not the scared, controlled, threatened spouse of this deviant murderer. She was active, and not only active, but a lot of times, in a lot of these cases, the leader.
We're going to get into that right now. During the trial, Judith's defense painted her as a victim of Alvin's abuse. Judith claimed to have been beaten severely by Alvin, forced into this life of crime, but others testified that Judith was the ringleader. Alvin had a very dependent personality and was willing to follow orders from Judith. John Hancock testified that Judith was definitely in charge when he and Janice were kidnapped. Whatever Judith wanted, Alvin would go along with. Alvin's attorney advised him that Judith might be bad news for him. Alvin said, "I love her. I'll make it work."
Oh, my God.
Alvin was just willing to do whatever to try to keep Judith out of trouble, go along with her, appease her.
Yeah, he was willing to fall on the sword if it would help.
His lawyer described him in a newspaper interview as a slob in love.
So his impression is that he's in over his head. Now he's got in all this trouble, but he's still just all about Judith.
Right, and his attorney is trying to give him advice, like, this is what you need to do, and Alvin's just like, I can't, I love her.
Gosh, I love her. So yeah, his bet in these, which Judith is already doing it, right? Nobody doesn't sound like she's directing her, because that's how her mind works. We need to put it all on him so I get in less trouble.
An officer with the Rome Police Department said Alvin was certainly under Judith's spell, describing him as not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Judith initially tried to seek being tried as a juvenile offender, which would have only given her 3 years in jail.
Yeah, but they're not going to play that shit in Georgia.
And though Alvin admitted to other crimes, none could be substantiated. Investigators have not ruled out the couple's involvement in other murders. Now, at the time they were picked up in Tennessee on the bad check charge, another teenage girl, and I only got the name Casey. They didn't have her last name in any of the news sources.
She may have been a juvenile, maybe.
Right. A girl named Casey was with them. Casey said that Judith bragged to her about the crimes, including killing another girl in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
So they'd already had another victim in their clutches.
Judith told Casey she liked seeing the looks on people's faces when she pulled a gun on them. In the morning, when police had come to arrest Judith, the girl said Alvin held her in the bathroom of their motel room at gunpoint until police took Judith in. They came to arrest her. Judith went with them. He held this girl in the bathroom. And then once they had all left, Alvin let her go.
Damn, the cops didn't clear the room?
No, I guess not.
What
They
the
just
hell,
came to, like,
police?
serve a warrant. A body discovered in Macon, Georgia, of Fredonia Smith had an undetermined cause of death. The 18-year-old girl was missing for some time. The Neelleys have been considered suspects in her case. Police even went to investigate the area where Alvin claimed they had dumped a body near Milledgeville, Georgia. A search of the kudzu field recovered no bodies. Alvin claimed the pair worked as sex traffickers for a prostitution ring.
Yeah, that could be him being grandiose with his own legend, maybe.
He said they were tasked with recruiting women off the street to work for the ring, but much more of that information died with Alvin. Judith, on the other hand, has not been very forthcoming with her crimes.
Yeah, that's because that's how she's wired. She's wired to be in control, control the narrative, the information, and just basically like, F you. I'm not going to help you or tell you anything. I'm in jail anyway. It's not going to help me.
Alvin died on October 25th, 2005, while serving a life sentence in Georgia for kidnapping and murdering Janice K. Chapman. Judith was saved from the electric chair when former Alabama Governor Fob James commuted her death sentence several days before he left office in 1999. She remains imprisoned in Louisiana. Life without parole in Alabama means that. Life in prison. And so she was transferred from Alabama to this Louisiana prison, but basically, like, the sentence in Louisiana is like, no, you're going to stay in prison. I mean, they're not going to let her out.
So it never changes. Life without parole in Alabama never changes. You're in prison for life.
I mean, that's pretty much the reality of it, yeah. And she was transferred, but again, she still faces life in prison for the murder of Janice Chapman in Georgia. So even if she was paroled, she's not going to ever be out of prison because she still has this other life sentence.
They should have left her on death row.
I mean,
man.
I know I probably said that in a very convoluted way, but...
No, but they should have left her on death row, in my opinion, and she should have paid with her life for her crimes.
Well, one of the reasons that Fob James commuted her sentence was that he was, I guess, very much like an evangelical Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And Judith had claimed, she had found God. And so that was able to, like, sway his decision.
I found Jesus over here at the prison. He was just sitting out there by the picnic table. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, don't I know you? And he's like, I am the Lamb. I am the Father's Son. And you're like, are you Jesus? And he's like, yes, child. And Jesus hangs out at the weirdest places, don't you think? At the bottom of bottles, alcohol bottles, and in prison. And at the bottom of, like, meth-fueled, days and days on end, meth parties. And then people find Jesus at the end of those, too. So I'm just wondering if Jesus hangs out anywhere that's wholesome.
Well, yeah, but that was Jesus' whole shtick.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he'll be there when you need him.
Was hanging out with the disenfranchised.
Ah, okay. So, okay.
I'm gonna take you to Sunday school.
Okay.
The judge who sentenced Judith said 25 years that he had been on the stand or in his little judge booth. I don't know what you want to call that, right? That he had not thrown around the term evil.
Oh, yeah.
Like, at all. But that Judith Neelley was one of the most evil people he'd ever encountered.
Yeah, through all that testimony and evidence and stuff, it left an impression on this judge. It didn't matter. She can sit over there and look like a little, tiny, poor little Judith, a little meek girl. Because at this point, she's still young. She's still, 18? She's still a kid. And he was not buying it. He was like, she's a little monster.
In 1994, Judith used her powers of manipulation over another person. I mean, the story just never ends. Judith enticed a woman to agree to a suicide pact. The woman, who lived in Etowah County, had been corresponding with Judith by phone and through letters, like a prison pen pal thing.
Oh, okay.
However, a tape recording was found with the two discussing their plans for suicide. The woman shot herself. Judith was discovered in her death row cell. She had slashed her wrists with a razor.
But she didn't die.
She didn't die.
Man, she's like Hannibal Lecter.
A psychiatrist in one of the crime documentaries I watched for this case stated that the couple, if they had never met, that Alvin would have likely never committed murder. He would have just continued with, like, petty crimes.
Right.
Maybe
got his shit together eventually.
Stealing and pickpocketing and that kind of thing.
Bad checks.
Car theft. However, Judith would have likely been linked to a murder regardless.
Right? Again, so there you go.
It was just like in her personality.
Yeah.
And the psychiatrist was like, one way